The Biltmore Los Angeles opened in 1923 on Pershing Square in downtown Los Angeles, the largest hotel west of Chicago at the time of its construction, and the most architecturally ambitious hospitality project that the American West had attempted. The building was designed by Schultz and Weaver in a Spanish-Italian Renaissance style that communicated institutional permanence with the level of material investment that downtown Los Angeles had not previously seen and has not since replicated at equivalent scale. The lobby, the rendezvous court, and the Crystal Ballroom constitute one of the most intact ensembles of 1922's Grand Hotel interior architecture remaining in the United States. The Academy Awards were held at the Biltmore 8 times between 1931 and 1942. Robert F. Kennedy was at the Biltmore on the night he won the California primary in 1968, departing from it to the Ambassador Hotel where he was assassinated. None of that paid the debt service on the leveraged buyout that destroyed the Biltmore's financial independence in the 1980s. The Biltmore's ownership history between 1923 and the present involves 6 distinct ownership structures, each of which acquired the asset under circumstances that reflected the financial condition of the seller rather than the commercial potential of the building, and each of which placed on the asset a capital structure that the building's operating cash flows were required to service under market conditions the acquisition had not adequately modeled. The pattern is consistent enough across 8 decades to constitute a forensic finding independent of any individual transaction. The Biltmore Los Angeles has been systematically over-leveraged at acquisition in every decade of its post-opening history by ownership structures whose optimization targets ranged from real estate arbitrage to brand expansion to private equity return, none of which were aligned with the building's long-term physical and institutional health. The forensic entry point for this case is the leveraged buyout of the late 1980s, which established a debt basis for the asset that subsequent ownership structures have been managing, restructuring, and partially resolving ever since, without fully retiring the financial complexity that the transaction introduced. The building that opened in 1923 as the largest hotel west of Chicago is still standing. The capital structure of the leveraged buyout that acquired it 60 years later is still, in various transmuted forms, a feature of the asset's financial history. If this is your first case file from this channel, subscribe now, because every episode adds one more layer to what you are about to understand about the architecture of institutional failure. The Biltmore Los Angeles was acquired in 1987 by a group that included Prudential Insurance Company of America and a real estate partnership in a leveraged transaction that valued the hotel at approximately $120 million and placed a debt structure on the asset that the Los Angeles luxury hotel market of 1987 could plausibly service, provided the market continued performing at the trajectory that had characterized the mid-1980s expansion cycle. That proviso was the covenant that nobody read carefully enough, because the Los Angeles luxury hotel market of 1990, 1991, and 1992 bore no resemblance to the market of 1987 that the acquisition financing had modeled. The specific covenant failure at the Biltmore emerged from the intersection of 3 simultaneous adverse developments that the acquisition model had not adequately stress-tested. The first was the national recession of the early 1990s, which compressed business and leisure travel demand across all hotel categories in every American market. The second was the Los Angeles-specific disruption of the 1992 civil unrest, following the Rodney King verdict, which concentrated its most severe effects in the downtown corridor where the Biltmore operated and produced a period of acute occupancy compression that the hotel's debt service calendar did not pause to accommodate. The third was the structural decline of downtown Los Angeles as a commercial hospitality destination that had been underway since the mid-1970s, and that the 1987 acquisition had treated as a temporary condition rather than as a long-term competitive disadvantage. That third factor is the one that no covenant language could have addressed and no stress test scenario could have resolved, because it was not a cyclical condition, but a structural one. Downtown Los Angeles had been losing its status as the city's primary commercial and hospitality hub to West Los Angeles, Century City, Beverly Hills, and the West Side for more than a decade before the 1987 acquisition. The Biltmore's position on Pershing Square, which had been a prestigious central address in 1923, had become a liability in a city whose commercial geography had reorganized itself around the automobile and the freeway in ways that made the downtown core progressively less relevant to the corporate and leisure travelers that a luxury hotel requires. The acquisition had not priced that structural shift. It had priced the building as though the address still commanded the market position it had held in 1923. At what point does a building's geographic position become a structural liability rather than a structural asset? Leave your analysis in the comments below. The appraisal methodology applied to the Biltmore at the time of its 1987 leveraged buyout shared the foundational deficiency that this channel has documented across 13 case files: the treatment of peak cycle market conditions as a stable baseline for debt sizing rather than as a point in a cycle whose correction was inevitable and whose timing was the only genuinely uncertain variable. The Biltmore's 1987 appraisal valued the asset using a capitalization of stabilized net operating income that assumed revenue per available room consistent with the mid-1980s Los Angeles luxury hotel market trajectory. That trajectory had been shaped by the Pacific Rim investment activity of the period, the growth of the Los Angeles entertainment and technology sectors, and a convention calendar supported by the Los Angeles Convention Center's expansion program. All three drivers compressed simultaneously between 1989 and 1993. Pacific Rim investment flows reversed as the Japanese real estate bubble began its deflation. The entertainment and technology sectors retrenched in the national recession, and the convention calendar collapsed as downtown Los Angeles became, in the perception of meeting planners nationally, an unreliable destination following the 1992 civil unrest. The appraisal had not modeled the combined impact of those three reversals because the probability of their simultaneous occurrence had not been treated as a realistic planning scenario in the market environment of 1987. That failure is not unique to the Biltmore appraisal. It is the standard condition of peak cycle appraisals in every market that this channel has examined, from South Florida in 2006 to Manhattan in 1988 to San Francisco in 1986. The appraisal methodology treats the conditions of the present as the baseline for the future and discounts the possibility that the present is a peak rather than a floor. The structural decline of downtown Los Angeles as a hospitality destination compounded the cyclical appraisal error with the directional one. The cyclical errors in the Fontainebleau, the Plaza, and the Mark Hopkins appraisals produced distress that resolved when the market cycle recovered. The structural error in the Biltmore appraisal produced a permanent competitive disadvantage that market recovery partially but not fully addressed. A hotel in a location that has structurally declined relative to its competitive set does not recover its market position when the cycle turns. It recovers to a permanently lower position than the appraisal had modeled as its floor. If the forensic analysis this channel conducts is changing how you read real estate headlines, the like button is how the algorithm knows to send this case file to the next analyst who needs it. The Biltmore's ownership history following the 1987 leveraged buyout is a succession of restructurings, rebranding efforts, and partial resolutions that have managed the consequences of the original transaction without eliminating the financial complexity it introduced. The Prudential-led ownership transferred the asset in the early 1990s under circumstances that reflected the distress of the post-recession Los Angeles hotel market. Subsequent owners have included institutional investors, hospitality operators, and development partnerships that have each attempted, with varying degrees of success, to reposition the Biltmore for the Los Angeles luxury hotel market of their respective decades without resolving the fundamental tension between the building's downtown location, its 1920s scale physical plant, and the debt structures that the leveraged buyout established as the financial baseline from which every subsequent owner has been required to work. The architecture of denial embedded in the Biltmore's post-1987 ownership history is the denial that the building's location on Pershing Square can be made competitive with the West Side luxury hotel market through capital investment and operational excellence alone, without the structural reversal of the geographic shift that has been redirecting Los Angeles's commercial activity away from downtown for 50 years. That reversal has been partially occurring as downtown Los Angeles has experienced a residential and cultural renaissance since the early 2000s that has brought new hotel development, restaurant activity, and arts investment to the corridor around the Biltmore. But the reversal has not been complete enough or fast enough to validate the revenue projections that have justified successive acquisition prices and the debt structures associated with them. Each owner has believed that the downtown Los Angeles Renaissance was one cycle away from validating the Biltmore's market position at the price that owner paid. The Renaissance has been real. The validation has been partial. The debt structures have been patient, but not infinitely so, and the gap between the validation that has occurred and the validation that the acquisition prices required has been the consistent feature of the Biltmore's financial history since 1987. The Crystal Ballroom is still intact. The Rendezvous Court is still intact. The Spanish-Italian Renaissance facade is still intact. The leveraged buyout's financial legacy is also still intact, in the sense that every subsequent owner has been managing its consequences rather than operating from a clean financial baseline. The Biltmore Los Angeles is currently operated under the Millennium Hotels and Resorts flag, a positioning that places it within a mid-market international hospitality brand rather than within the ultra-luxury competitive set that its architecture and its historical associations would suggest as its natural positioning. That gap between the building's architectural ambition and its current brand positioning is itself a forensic document. It reflects the accumulated financial constraints of 6 ownership cycles that have progressively narrowed the range of capital investment that the asset's balance sheet can support, leaving the building in a competitive position that its physical quality exceeds, but that its financial history has made difficult to transcend. The downtown Los Angeles Renaissance that successive ownership structures have been betting on since the early 2000s has produced genuine commercial activity around the Biltmore. The Pershing Square station of the metro system provides connectivity that the automobile-era Biltmore never had. The Arts District to the east has attracted a demographic that the historic Biltmore can appeal to in ways that suburban conference hotels cannot. And the residential conversion of former commercial buildings in the downtown core has created a neighborhood context that makes the Biltmore's location more commercially viable than it was in the depths of downtown's 1,982nd and 1,992nd decline. What the Biltmore case reveals about the broader pattern of institutional failure documented across this channel's archive is the specific compounding effect of structural location risk on cyclical financial risk. Every case file in this archive has documented a building whose financial structure failed because it was sized for a market that the cycle eventually corrected away from. The Biltmore documents a building whose financial structure failed for that reason, and additionally because the address itself had structurally declined in a way that cyclical recovery could only partially reverse. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences held its awards at the Biltmore 8 times. Robert F. Kennedy slept in its rooms on the last full night of his life. The California Democratic Party has held its conventions there. The building has absorbed more of Los Angeles's defining moments than any other structure in the city's history. It has not been able to convert that absorption into a financial structure that clears the debt the 1987 leveraged buyout established. The marble is still there. The debt is a different kind of permanence. If this case file changed how you evaluate the interaction between structural location risk and cyclical financial risk in urban hospitality assets, subscribe to this channel, because the next case examines a building that the city destroyed and then tried to rebuild from memory, and what the cost of that attempt revealed about how cities price their own architectural history. And in the comments, given the Biltmore's documented structural location disadvantage relative to the West Side luxury hotel market, what specific capital structure or repositioning strategy would have allowed a post-1987 owner to achieve a sustainable competitive position without requiring the downtown Los Angeles Renaissance to occur faster than it has. The case file is open.